Get over here, you pussy!
Get f***ing slit, mate. Now!
I just threw my armor!
Keep going!
Condemnation grows over Nazi salutes performed in Melbourne as video emerges of a former Victorian MP being pushed by a police officer. Ex-US President Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday and calls on his supporters to protest. New South Wales Labor says they won't change their gambling reform package, while the Greens say a deal with the Liberals in the event of a minority government is off the table. And Vladimir Putin visits Crimea on the anniversary of its annexation from Ukraine as Joe Biden welcomes an arrest warrant. Good evening. Condemnation is growing over yesterday's scenes of the Victorian State Parliament, where a group of around 20 or so people performed the Nazi salute repeatedly directed at pro-trans protesters. It comes as video emerges of former Animal Justice MP Andy Medic being pushed by a police officer while he and another man yelled at the group. Reporter Lincoln Holmes has the details.
Protesters yell out at a group of around 24 people as they repeatedly perform the Nazi salute directly at them.
Those Nazis were allowed free rein in that entire front area to march around, as you see in the videos. They're marching around in front of the state parliament. They marched up onto the steps, they came down, they came up to us to antagonize us, they came back. The cops were not kettling them into a little position, but they were doing that to the queer people with rainbow flags.
Scenes at the state's police union now say they want banned.
Yes, they're inciting hatred. Yes, it's offensive and deeply offensive in the community, but it's not something that police can actively intervene on, and that's difficult for us.
Wayne Gatt from the Victoria Police Association says officers could not step in and stop the group from making the Nazi salutes.
They've got a job to do, and that includes keeping the peace and sadly having to protect people with those sorts of views and that sort of hatred and prejudice.
It comes as more videos emerge of police clashing with pro-trans protesters. Former Animal Justice Party MP Andy Medic was filmed yelling at a group of men and was then pushed by an officer who ordered him to move on.
He's right! Move!
Get over here, you pussy!
Get f***ing slit, mate. Now!
I just threw my armor!
Keep going!
How about you go against me?
Bronwyn Curry from the AJP described it as shameful behaviour. Labor MP Josh Burns now says it is time to consider whether tougher laws are needed. Victorian Liberals MP David Southwick and Brad Batten also said it was sickening. Nazi symbols were banned in Victoria last year with almost total support in Parliament. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
And arrests have been made overnight following those clashes. The Herald Sun reports a 22-year-old Point Cook man was arrested for allegedly putting a female officer in a headlock and taking her to the ground, while a 23-year-old Thornbury woman was arrested for allegedly slapping another officer. A 22-year-old from Preston was also arrested for unlawful assault. In a statement, a Victoria Police spokeswoman said that some of these groups failed to engage with police in the lead-up to the protest or altered their plans without notice, resulting in the potential for multiple clashes. Consequently, officers were required to form many lines between the different groups to protect the safety of all involved, stop breaches of the peace, and prevent any physical violence. Labor is set to retain the Northern Territory seat of Arafura in a by-election following the death of the incumbent MP, with results still set to come. Counting last night showed a swing of around 15% towards the ALP. Only 3 parties, Labor, the Country Liberals and the Federation Party, contested. Arafura last changed hands in 2016 when it went from the CLP to the ALP. The results mean Manuel Brown will enter the Parliament and the NT government's majority is safe ahead of next August Territory election. Former US President Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday. In a post on his Truth Social platform, he claimed that illegal leaks from the district attorney's office suggested he would be taken into custody early next week, calling on supporters to protest. Officials are thought to be eyeing charges in a hush money investigation, while local law enforcement authorities are reportedly bracing for public safety ramifications in the event he is indeed prosecuted. Well, with less than a week to go until New South Wales decides, the Coalition has made a promise to lower the public transport cap. It currently stands at $50 weekly. Under the plan, commuters will instead travel free on trains, buses and light rails after spending $40 on public transport. And meanwhile, Labor says they won't change their gambling reform package despite calls from crossbenchers in the event of a minority government. The Greens are also speaking to 6 News, saying that a deal with the Liberals is effectively off the table. Reporter Austin Pollock has more.
With the New South Wales election looking like it will come down to the wire, crossbenchers may be key in determining who will lead the state for the next 4 years. Independents Joe McGear, Greg Piper and Alex Greenrich are all fairly safe bet of retaining their seats. The Greens are aiming to hold on to their 3 lower house seats, including Balmain, where incumbent Jamie Parker is retiring. 3 MPs elected as members of the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party are also a chance of now winning as independents, and there's also a possibility of former Liberal Gareth Ward also winning as an independent. A coalition majority is not expected to happen, but if Labor doesn't reach a majority, either could form government in a minority. Big issues for crossbenchers include gambling reforms. Labor, however, says they won't change their pokies policy because they believe their trial of the cashless gaming card goes far enough. Chris Minns and Dominic Perrottet are also claimed earlier in the week they won't cut a crossbench deal in any shape or form to form government. Upper House Greens MP Kate Farnham has spoken to 6 News, saying a deal with the Liberals is effectively off the cards, with her party naming 7 demands in the event of a minority government.
Our party members, we're a very grassroots democratic party. Our members get to have a say in whether we'll support a government in any way. So we have decided quite a few years ago, actually, as a party, that we would never support a Liberal national government. So that's kind of ruled out. But we don't want Labor also to expect that they can just rely on our support. They shouldn't take our support for granted, because Labor's actually been pretty crap on quite a few things.
Are these, just to fully clarify, especially for voters, absolute must? Like, there's no way you're going to budge on them, or can you negotiate and say, okay, maybe the only a few of these demands, if you give in to them, or all 7 of them just absolute must?
Look, they will be the starting point. So they're the priorities that we have taken to the election. That's what people will vote for the Greens over for this election. So if we've got a mandate where the voters put us in the balance of power, where we've we've got 4 to 5 Greens MPs in the upper house and a good solid number in the lower house, and we're in the balance of power, then we will be going in with that mandate from voters. Look, we all know that Chris Minns isn't going to come and sit at the table and say, okay, Kate Fairman and everybody, the Greens, here we go, we'll do this, we'll end coal and gas, we'll control rents, we'll end native forest logging, do all of this tomorrow. But there's a lot within those policy asks that you can commit to that give an intention and an indication that you are going to do more, or an intention that you are serious and you are committed. So that's the whole thing around negotiation, right? So this is what we're offering, this is what we're saying, in terms of come to us, and we will also go to them, of course. If there is a hung parliament, we won't be sitting there, just waiting for the phone to ring.
Well, Helen Conway is running as an independent candidate in the Liberal-held seat of North Shore. Now she is one of the several so-called Tills aiming to get into Parliament. She also spoke to 6 News amid the possibility of a minority government.
Who knows what the outcome's going to be and whether or not I'll be in that position. So to that extent, it's a hypothetical. We don't really know exactly what the circumstances will be. But my overriding lens will be to, if I am in that position, look at the 2 major parties and see which of those parties best reflects and can support the concerns and aspirations of the community here in North Shore. I think that people have come to the view that the governments we've had have not truly reflected them. So here in New South Wales, when I'm on the ground talking to people in North Shore, what they're saying is, for example, in relation to integrity, there's a serious concern about how people behave in Macquarie Street, and the values of the government do not reflect their values, and they feel diminished as a community that they're represented by people who don't behave in a fashion that they would respect. So I think there is a move. I think people have seen the very good things that have been able to be done federally after the last federal election. So I think there's a more engaged sort of community. People are more aware of what can be achieved by crossbenchers. So I'd be surprised if this wave doesn't continue.
And regardless of a minority in the lower house, we could also see the Greens, One Nation, Shooters, Fishers and Farmers, and potentially the Liberal Democrats, Legalised Cannabis Party and Elizabeth Farley Independents in the balance of power in the upper house.
And 6 News will be live all election night with our special coverage of the New South Wales state election, bringing you results the moment they come in from our team. It's live and even a bit loose. Don't miss it this Saturday from 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Trade Minister Don Farrell has told Sky News that Paul Keating's criticism of Penny Wong is completely unfair. In an interview, the Labor Senator said Ms Wong is turning out to be one of the finest foreign ministers I've ever seen in this country in my lifetime.
I thought his criticism of Foreign Minister Wong was completely unfair. In my view, Minister Wong is turning out to be one of the finest foreign ministers that I've ever seen in this country in my lifetime. And of course, Defence Minister Miles doing a terrific job, and our Prime Minister has been working very, very hard to restore relationships which were damaged with a range of countries over the period of the last few years.
Overseas, Russian President Vladimir Putin has made a visit to Crimea on the 9-year anniversary of its annexation from Ukraine. He visited an art school and children's centre, coming after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant accusing him of war crimes, specifically accusing him of bearing responsibility for the abductions of children from Ukraine since the war started last year. US President Joe Biden has now welcomed that arrest warrant, saying it is justified. North Korea says more than 800,000 young people have volunteered to join the army to fight US imperialists. State media says the close to 1 million people want to mercilessly wipe out the war maniacs, so they join the army to defend the country. It comes after Pyongyang test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile for the second time this year. And now it's Ivan Amelli in Perth with what's making news right now on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, dedicated public housing for the next generation. Growing support for specific new housing targets for WA's young adults in need. A WAMN News exclusive.
Also tonight, we'll get it right. Deputy Prime Minister's pledge when questioned over AUKUS uranium disposal arrangements.
Alleged teenage axe attack terrorised the Rivervale community as one man is still on the run.
Chops and Chats delivers mental health assistance with style, and later Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
All right, thanks both Ivan and Amelie there. Now changing pace, taking a look at tomorrow's weather forecast right across the country. Brisbane, we've got partly cloudy conditions there, 31 degrees. Rain expected in Sydney, 23. A top of 22 in Canberra, down slightly to 21 in Melbourne. Only 16 in Hobart. Adelaide, it'll be 26. 37 and sunny in Alice Springs, also sunny 35 in Perth and Darwin, a warm top of 32. A reminder of the top stories we're following on 6 News this hour, and condemnation is growing over yesterday's incident at Victoria's State Parliament, where a group of around 20 or so people repeatedly performed the Nazi salute and clashed with pro-trans protesters. It comes as video emerges of former Victorian MP Andy Medic being pushed by a police officer while yelling at the group. And former US President Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday. In a post on Truth Social, he claimed that illegal leaks from the District Attorney's Office suggested he would be taken into custody early next week, calling on supporters to protest. And that is 6 News for this hour. There is more news 24/7 on our website, SIXNewsAU.com, and on social media. You search 6NewsAU to find us. More news coverage continues right after this. For now though, I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.
Hello, I'm Roman McKinnon. You're watching Uncensored right here on 6 News. The Queensland election isn't until October 2024, but the issues that will likely swing votes are already making headlines. The Labor government has introduced new laws in the hopes of tackling youth crime, admitting that some of what they have announced is incompatible with human rights. But even with Anastasia Palaszczuk facing criticism, winning the next election may not be easy for LNP leader David Crisafulli. His party has only ever won a single general election, and Labor has been in power since the 1990s almost continuously. 6 News spoke to the state opposition leader about all that and more. David Crisafulli, welcome to 6 News.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
The Premier says this is above politics and about putting community safety first. If you were in government right now, what would you do to tackle this youth crime wave?
Consequences for action, unshackle the judiciary, but above all, get serious about gold standard early intervention. And I think at the moment we're failing across all those platforms. Now, it's one thing to say that something's above politics, but in the end, the solutions that the community have been putting forward, and we've been doing them on their behalf, has fallen on deaf ears for the better part of 2 years. And it's only once it became a political issue and innocent people lost their lives that the government suddenly found this interest in doing yet another point plan to try and deal with it. But we're missing, the heart of the issue lies that we're failing kids at both ends of the Youth Justice Act. We're failing them early on when we've got to get in and give them help, give them hope, give them employment and education and help them turn their life around. We're failing at that end, but we're also failing them at the other end, which is when you've got those hardcore repeat offenders who are just ripping the guts out of community. And, you know, the Youth Justice Act was watered down 8 years ago. So you've had 8 years of a pipeline of these offenders and their behaviours getting more brazen. And they're the ones that we needed to deal with 8 years ago. So I take the approach of let's get in gold standard early intervention, let's turn kids around and let's make them productive members of society.
Police Minister Mark Ryan said that last week that the new breach of bail offence is incompatible with human rights and that the state's Human Rights Act will be overridden in the process. Do you support this decision to override a Human Rights Act?
We've been pushing for breach of bail for a long time because we do believe in consequences for action. But the great breach that's happening at the moment is the failure at the front end to turn kids around. So, look, I'll never walk away from making sure that there are consequences for action, and I want to make sure that the hardcore people get punished for their bad behaviour. But the greatest human rights violation is not turning a kid around early on when you've got a chance. The greatest violation is the fact that many of these kids are known to child safety, and yet we haven't done anything about it. That's the real violation. So, look, I'm not someone who walks both sides of the street, and I'm up front. If someone has a knife and they're going into someone's house and they're using that weapon, hey, you've got to have consequences for that bad behaviour. That's just a non-negotiable. But at the other end of the spectrum, you can't just say that you turn your back on a generation of kids, and you can't say that someone makes a mistake and you lock them up and throw away the key. That's never been my style. You know, people deserve a second chance, but that comes with real, genuinely trying to turn kids around. And one of the things that we've done, Roman, is we've written to the Auditor General and asked for a proper review of everything we're doing. And let's have a look at what's working and what's not and what we can do better. Because if we can turn kids around, that makes a better society. And in the long run, it's better for everyone. It's better for the budget. It's better for the community. I don't believe in not trying to turn kids around early, because, you know, if you give someone aspiration and you show them a way, you can turn people around from a life, what will otherwise be a lifetime of crime.
You announced 3 proposed legislation changes, including an early intervention plan, changes to the Bail Act and not having detention as a last resort. How different are these to the Palaszczuk government's plan?
Well, they're about consequences for action, but they're also about getting in early and turning people around. And you mentioned one of them, and that's removing detention as a last resort. I see that as unshackling the judiciary and allowing them to do their job. And if a magistrate believes that a young person does need a custodial sentence, well, that gives them the freedom to do it. If they believe they can send them off to an early intervention program, well, that gives them the freedom to do that as well. And if we can get gold standard early intervention, that will help turn things around. The problem for the government is they consistently see this as a political issue rather than a law and order issue and rather than a youth justice issue. And you only have to look at the history of this, the decision to water down the Act early on, but then all of the piecemeal changes that have happened throughout. It just paints the tale of a government that's just chaotic in its behaviour. And you'll never turn around a system if you don't have that real attention to detail. And every time I read the reports that exist in this space, and there's been many, there's a common theme. It's an announcement, and somehow the government think that let's make an announcement and then everything's hunky-dory. Well, it doesn't work like that. You've got to plan it, then you've got to deliver it, then you've got to go back and evaluate it and see what's working and what's not. And there just isn't that attention to detail at the moment. And we're failing a generation of kids, and we are failing a generation of Queenslanders as well.
Well, we can expect this issue of crime to be a big topic at next year's state election. Just on that, why do you think that it is that the LNP and its predecessors have only won a single state election since 1989?
We need to get back to doing what Queenslanders demand of us, and that is talking about them and the issues that matter to them. And look, don't get me wrong, we're up against a formidable political machine. The Labor Party in Queensland is a formidable political machine, and the Premier is a formidable politician. So I'm certainly not taking anything for granted. And what I can say, though, and even my harshest critics will acknowledge, that I made a commitment a couple of years ago that I would reform the LNP, and reform we have. And we've been united, we've been disciplined, we're hungry to win, we're hungry to serve, and people are seeing that we're credibly putting forward policies from opposition that the government's adopting, and we are highlighting not just the issues, and those issues are many at the moment, the economy, and we've seen some hugely mixed messages, particularly around tax and reform. Service delivery, we've spoken about one, which is law and order, but don't get me started on housing. We have not partnered with local government to deliver infrastructure to allow young people to get in and buy their first home, to make it affordable for someone to rent. We haven't delivered social housing at the standard that we should and the level that we should. We haven't partnered with the community housing, and that's created a feeding frenzy for people trying to get into the property market. And on health, our ambulance ramping is the worst in the country. So on the service delivery front, we've failed, and I've highlighted that, but also put forward our solutions. And then on integrity, many of your viewers will have seen me speak many times about the integrity crisis in Queensland, and I want to run a government that people can be proud of. So we have reformed the party, and that's given us clear air to talk about ourselves and to talk to Queenslanders about the reform that we've done and the issues that matter to them. And the state government in recent times has proven to be quite chaotic, and the internal factions are starting to tear them apart. But to come back to where I started, Ronan, I'm under no illusions how big this task is. We need to win 14 seats in Queensland. That is a very, very big mountain. But we're hungry to serve, mate.
Do you think it's possible that the merger of the Liberals and Nationals just hasn't worked at a state level because it's only led to a single win that was ended pretty soon after?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is the right model, and I think it can do what no other entity can, and that is unite the city and the country. And I know from myself, I was born in regional Queensland, and mum and dad are still on the farm. They still love it. I live on the Gold Coast, and I understand the southeast. So I'd like to think that, having lived and worked in regional Queensland and in metropolitan Queensland, I can understand the issues that matter to all Queenslanders. But in the end, the things that I get asked from the butcher in Boulia or the baker in Brisbane, mate, if you boil it down, it's all the same thing. They just want the government to get out of their life, to have consistency when it comes to economic policy. They want to know if they pick up the phone that an AMBO will turn up to look after their kids, that there's an education system that enables their children to be able to get ahead, that we have world-class national parks that are managed well and we're serious about protected areas. They want to know that the government cares about them and not the internal ramifications of the government. It's all, in the end, the things that unite the city and the country. I do believe the LNP is the vehicle to do it, and we've sorted out ourselves. We are united, we are focused, and this government's been in power for 3 terms or 10 years at the next election. And one of your previous guests is the current Prime Minister, Mr. Albanese, and one of the things he said in the lead up to the last election, which I remember well, was governments don't get better in their 4th term. And I reckon he's right.
And on the matter of Parliament and, as you say, holding the government to account, do you support bringing back an upper house in Queensland?
What I want to do in the meantime, and I know there's a lot of debate on that, and debate that, you know, from both sides. Some people say the last thing we need is more politicians. Other people say we need scrutiny, and Queensland is an anomaly in that area. I'll tell you what I do support in the meantime, and that is to get our committee systems to work the way that they should. At the moment, the committees, in many cases, don't provide the robust checks and balances they should. And the estimates process, which every year is the one vehicle that the opposition has to probe and scrutinise the budget, it's turned into an absolute farce. And the way that Labor chairs run a protection racket for Labor ministers is wrong. And I've already said the way that I intend to reform that. I want that process chaired independently. So the Speaker or the Deputy Speaker or crossbench or whatever format it is, I want an end to hours upon hours of Dorothy Dixon nonsensical questions. I want genuine analysis. I want scrutiny. I want that process to work. So that'll be first cab of business if we're given the good fortune of winning and serving the people at the end of next year. But I know there's mixed views on an upper house. But in the meantime, let's get the system we've got working a heck of a lot better than what it is now.
Just finally, last year you made a TikTok that was watched over 3.5 million times, outlining the difference that learner drivers had to pay for their license. The cost was eventually slashed. Do you take any credit for that? And how do you and do you believe social media, especially TikTok, is important for political messaging?
It wasn't my win, mate. It was a win for young Queenslanders, and that came by a young person who had just paid the exorbitant fee of $186, and they went to their local member of parliament. They said, this is absolutely crazy. We had a look at it, and then we ran what I think was a pretty good campaign, but it was only a good campaign because of that, because of people power. And you're right, 3.5 million views, and the government were, quite frankly, forced into acting. Now, every young learner who goes to get their licence can put another $110 in their pocket. And mate, that makes me smile. That means something. And I've spoken to young people about the difference that means to them. That's the difference between being able to connect with mates. That's the difference between getting that licence, because many people had to work weeks to be able to save that. I spoke with young Queenslanders who said they would put that towards another driving lesson, which and as you know, that's worth 3 hours for every one. So that fast track getting it, it's life-changing. And I love that. On social media, it's a natural part of modern politics. I have 2 teenage daughters. They find it completely and utterly embarrassing when I turn up on their Friends For You page, but that's just the way it is. I promise them I won't dance. I don't, but I, do a bit of cooking and a bit of fun. In terms of the power of new age media, I can tell you, mate, the moment this request came through, I said to my guys, we are doing this interview. Long time viewer, first time on the show, but you can call me anytime. I like engaging with young people, and I might be getting towards that old dinosaur age, but I still understand that ultimately young people have a big say on the future, and I'm keen to get more young people in the parliament. And we had a chance about a year ago with a by-election, and we elected the youngest member of the Queensland Parliament. young fellow called Bryson Head in a by-election. And young man in his 20s, he is the youngest member of the parliament and he's a member of the LNP. And that's what reform looks like. And I can't wait to bring more young people into the parliament, more women, more people from different cultural backgrounds, more people from small business. And that's what I intend to do at the election next year.
David Christopherly, thanks so much for your time. Queensland Opposition Leader and LNP Leader David Christopherly there. A reminder that for the latest headlines and breaking news 24/7, as well as more editions of Uncensored, head to our website 6newsau.com or follow us on social media. Just search 6newsau to find us. I'm Roman McKinnon, thanks for tuning in.
When big news breaks.
It pains me to announce that I have no option but to resign from the office of Premier.
Reimpose stage 3 stay-at-home restrictions effective from midnight tomorrow night.
6 News is there for you.
This was a scene of what some are describing as almost a riot, violent confrontations with police and protesters.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute coverage that's focused on the facts.
I just wrapped up a call with the Trump campaign.
The waters have begun receding in southeast Queensland now. The cleanup begins.
No matter the time.
Welcome to this 6 News major breaking news we have for you.
No matter the place.
Yeah, sorry, I'm at the supermarket right now.
You'll always see it first right here on